Hello and welcome to the Overnight Experts podcast. We are just looking at subjects we like and studying them and talking about them as we want. Are we experts? No, but we have fun and we're going to show just to talk about what we enjoy. Anyway, this is JJ.
I'm David.
And I'm Aiden.
Today I wanted to talk about my favorite animal, the gray wolf, but also specifically the concept that often goes around of the alpha wolf. I think it's very much popular science to kind of understand kind of the concept of you expect like a hierarchy in that. Like I think everyone kind of generally gets the gist.
Yeah, like the alpha wolf is the toughest and the boss of all the other wolves.
Yeah, effectively the concept of like an alpha in any species, and it's come up in other places in science. There are some primates that they have an association to, but basically just a concept in social creatures that denotes a hierarchy usually determined by competition, and whoever comes out on top or the alpha is usually would basically have access to other resources, better food or mates or that sort of deal. Commonly, it's been thought that wolves were structured in this way, and I think a lot of times it seems that way, but it's changed a lot, the impressions over the years, to the point where that's not really true or accurate. I think that generally people have caught on, like, yeah, that's not really how things work, like, but it still is a thing that's commonly thought of, and I just wanted to go into like the whole deal of why it came that way and like what we did later to learn more and find out, oh, that's not true. And I think it's a good story of learning like scientific processes and how this can be improved and done better.
Okay, so wolves use democratic elections to decide who's in charge of their pack. I got it.
No, no, that's our fault.
So basically what you're saying is that even though we have this idea of the alpha wolf, doesn't really have a lot of basis in science at the moment.
No, it honestly does not. And there's reasons this came about. Actually, if we can just go right into it, because I found the original research that brought around the term alpha wolf in the studies they did. So this goes back to like 1934. Yeah, 1934. When they started doing some research on wolf populations in the West. And it was a Rudolf Schenkel who was doing most of the research, and his studies are available online. But basically, he had been studying some packs in captivity to determine like their behavior, and this was like one of the earliest attempts at this. Like there had been some research on the species before, but nobody really looked into their social structures or anything. So honestly, even though a lot of stuff I'll show is not accurate, it's pretty clear why. He started going into it and really starting to understand, like, okay, what makes, like, how do these creatures work? How do wolves like socialize and do what they do?
But he starts on wolves in captivity?
Yes. I think there is a good point to make here, which is I don't have exact population data at the time, but long before the early 1900s, wolves, especially in the Americas, have largely been hunted at almost to extinction. Because early settlers, there had already been stigmas about wolves from settlers from Europe. They were often seen as just like, dangers and problems for livestock and other things. And when the settlers would come over here and they, started with animal husbandry and other things to like, raise cattle. And, if you wind up replacing bison in the area, hunt them out and put your cattle in place. Well, what are the wolves going to start hunting? They're going to start hunting the cattle.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, for quite a while, that had been a problem. It's like, oh, well, now we got to get rid of the wolves because they're getting rid of our cows. And so for a long time, they had been, driven to near extinction. And honestly, it seems like mostly the northern parts of Canada where they find. But at some point, it kind of makes sense that Schenkel had a captive packs to work on.
So like in a zoo?
Yes, actually. It was in what was the name? The Basel Zoological Garden was where he had done his research. And they had seemingly a couple different packs in different, I don't think cages is right, but like different sizes of land to roam around in. And so there were various, in that one space, there were populations they could work with, but they weren't necessarily, they were captive and put into places that were not quite right. And they also weren't related, which is important.
Mm.
Okay.
Well, honestly, all this is pretty upfront. Like, it's not like a big, I guess it is controversial, but it's not like it was a hidden like fact that this was done in captivity. Like, you can read the articles he has, and he's like, yeah, we did it right here.
Yeah, but I guess people's interpretations is that all wolves act like this, that this wouldn't be exclusive to these populations that humans have captured.
Pretty much, and there's even more that I find interesting in that, because there are a lot of assumptions that went in. One of them is absolutely, oh, if we study these in captivity, they will be representative of the species anywhere.
Did Schenkel assume that himself, or did he make that disclaimer?
I don't think he made that disclaimer up front, but there were a lot of assumptions in his work to begin with. I actually want to quote one of them, this like starting right on his sociology assumptions. Thorough studies of sociology of the wolf outside of captivity do not exist. However, the animal novels of Thompson Seton, Jack London, and, oh man, I'm going to say this wrong, Aslagson, I think, yeah, et al. Provide an approximate picture.
Okay.
So if you want to know about wolves, you read Call of the Wild. Got it.
Yeah, you see the problem there? Yeah. Well, first of all, that book is about a dog. Second of all,
Oh yeah, it is a sled dog, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I actually really like that novel. It starts off with Buck is a sled dog that's basically carried around Americas, and eventually this story ends up with him like becoming more like a feral dog and becoming effectively a wolf and whatever. I think it's an interesting story, and I like the way it's told, but it's in no way a good representative of how an approximate picture of real life. So you see what I mean when there were assumptions going right into this.
Okay, so already a flawed study.
Yes, it does reference an earlier study. I apologize. The research that he was doing started in 1939, but it was published later on in 1947, and he references something done at the same time of Young and Goldman, 1994. Exact treatment of sociology wolf cannot be found. They didn't do that research. They were just doing other research. So this was like one of the first attempts at this, but again, flawed from the start.
Okay, so what is he hoping to find out about these wolves, or is he just doing like a general survey on wolves?
I think he's trying to understand their social structure.
Okay.
Is basically the idea. And it's, I mean, great. Like, this is something that hasn't been studied before, and just seeing how they function and recognizing that an animal besides humans, have social structures, which I think was known at the time, but this is clearly not researched.
So it was 1947. So I guess why hadn't this research been done already is kind of what I want to know.
That's something I kind of want to know, and I am kind of working on his statements of this hasn't been studied.
Okay.
If somebody were to, find something where it had been studied before, okay, great, I'd like to know. But I'm kind of quoting him on saying that
it's the best research. Nobody's done this research before.
Yeah, basically. The first, everyone says first. No.
Well, like I think for my anthropology classes, I wish I remembered the dates, but like anthropology itself is a fairly newer discipline. And I can see, like, if you're only just figuring out how humans socialize with other humans, that it would take you a while to figure out, well, hang on, other animals have comparable behaviors.
Yes.
To then want to study that as well.
I guess that's fair.
Yeah, and I think at some point we've always kind of looked at dogs with at least some perspective of, I guess, empathy, because we've been breeding wolves to be friendlier for like most of human history. Like, we have some relation with them, and at some point you do want to study that and understand them more, and you will recognize, oh yeah, they have their own social structures in the wild. But yeah, basically there are a lot of problems with this study. One, we've already said they were in captivity, and he even notes like differences in behavior between like the amount of space the wolves had. Like, ones that had larger space actually were able to claim territory and function at least in some like territorial pack stances where they could defend it from other other wolves. And whereas if they were in smaller ones, they just didn't do that. There wasn't enough space.
But they weren't in cages. They were in like little fenced-in forests. Oh my gosh, fenced-in forests.
Fenced-in forests do technically exist. I'm not sure exactly what the structure and layout of this was. I probably could have dug further into it. There's quite a bit into this article. But they, what am I trying to go at? He recognized some social structures in there, like noticing that there seemed to be like he noticed an annual cycle of a social phenomenon where they would form packs around the winter, and generally have like, community and communication through howling and hunting together. But there were also noticed rivalries amongst them, in terms of like leadership and who gets mates and stuff like that. And so there was like actual like physical competition amongst them to become like, to have access to like food, mates, and other things. So that's where he kind of gets the concept of the alpha wolf, where he says that there's like a core to these packs, and the core includes like the female wolf, which he refers to as the bitch wolf. That is the correct term.
We're allowed to say it.
Yep, it's the science here. It's the science. I can say it. Presumably, the only mature one of the pack is what he claims is like that somehow the only mature female would be the one that would be there. And again, I sense assumptions in this. And at this point, he referred to the male as the lead wolf or the alpha wolf. So I think he develops the concept alpha later on. There's a whole lot going into here, but this is the kind of the progenitor of that.
But he coins the term alpha wolf.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe not in this study, but later.
Yeah. So this is kind of this study is basically what has been considered like accurate and reliable science all the way through into the 70s.
That's so interesting. It would be like trying to study humans if you were an alien, just using a prison population. And you just assume, oh yeah, humans' currency is cigarettes.
Yeah, whoever's hiding the shiv is in control.
Yeah.
And yeah, in fact, in so many ways, yes. And we can look at ourselves and understand ourselves so much better because we, live in our own society of humans and such. And we see adaptations and changes and functions all the time. And then you're looking at another species and trying to determine it from outside factors and maybe making assumptions on which factors are impacting it or not. And you get a very different perspective on how they actually function.
So is he like trying to base, did he see this behavior in other animals or other, I guess, research studies that show this? Like what other animals do this and what like might have given him this idea that wolves should do this?
I think he got the impression, that basically it seems mostly observational, like he's reporting on what he saw.
What science should be doing, but
yeah. The concept of an alpha exists in other species. I have not looked too much into the concept of like an alpha exists in some other things. I hadn't really done a lot of research into that. I know that there's been research into primates and say chimpanzees or gorillas or other species that seem to possess those traits. I'm not entirely familiar with the age on those, if that was already something that was researched and understood. So I am kind of isolating it to specifically canines here.
Okay.
But yeah, it seems like his stuff was mostly observational and just kind of picking names for the concepts in the social structure that he saw.
So I guess that's another question I might have. Like, is he obviously, you're going to go into more detail about how this notion is outdated, but
yes,
was he wrong about what he saw? Did he in fact see this behavior in this captive population, or did he just like misinterpret what he saw?
Well, there were some things that I think that he observed that seem also generally true in the wild. One thing we'll go into soon is the concept of dominance and submission absolutely does exist in wild wolves. Like there are ways that they express that through their actions to show like submission to a more dominant wolf, but it's not determined by competition. To advance ahead a little bit, currently it seems more that wolves don't organize themselves as as a big pack with an alpha who like basically fights to get on top. Rather, it's more like family structures where we might call what was an alpha rather like the mother and father of children, and then they grow up and move out and stuff like that. It's closer to a family, but there is still dominance and submission behavior in that structure inside of the family. So he did notice that, and that is, we generally agree that that's correct too. So it's not like the stuff he did was entirely inaccurate, but you can see how cramming these creatures into confined spaces, and when they're not even like related, like they're all from different packs, like they were just captured and brought in, there was a lot of problems that caused a different social structure that he observed.
So usually wolf packs, like I guess like age out, like you wouldn't have a continuous wolf pack. It's mother wolf, father wolf have kids, then their kids hunt with them until the kids are old enough to make their own packs.
Yeah, basically, when the stuff we understand now is when they reach maturity, what were the cubs will go out and start their own packs. So,
what happens to mom and dad? Do they die?
I guess they don't live very long. I think the average lifespan is 8 years. But I think they still mostly function, and some of them will last like a couple generations together. It depends on the structure.
What if we have grand wolf kids, grand wolf pups?
So the Jungle Book is not accurate then, because Mowgli is definitely older than 8.
Oh man, is he?
Let's find out.
I don't know. 8 might not be a very accurate lifespan to like a healthy environment, because there's a lot of other problems with reintroduction that could cause other issues in competition. I mentioned this as the general concept of how families work, and I'll show where that research comes from soon. But there are other examples like Yellowstone, where there are massive packs of like 20 wolves or more, and they all like exist through multiple generations, and they've just decided to stick together and take care of young together. But they're also reintroductions into an environment that they were in previously, and now have to contend with other things like livestock farmers and other things that are. There's a bunch of weird political problems with them being there as well.
Yeah, like I know people. Well, I don't personally know any people, but I know that there are people who are just very like offended by the existence of wolves.
Oh, you ever see a smoke a pack a day bumper sticker? Oh yeah, yeah. There's some crazy stuff out there. There are people in like I think it was a couple, maybe even a decade ago now, but like operations in Alaska to like hunt them by helicopter and stuff.
Oh yes, Sarah Palin and her famous sniping wolves from a helicopter thing.
Yeah. Basically, there's the interactions we have with them are still contentious to this day, and I kind of default back to that. Well, if you replace bison with cattle, wolves don't really care all that much. They'll keep hunting them. But yeah, so what Rudolf Schenkel researched was basically considered accurate for quite a long time. And there was a book published by another wolf researcher, David Meck, in 1970 that was called The Wolf, the Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species. This was a book published in 1970 that wasn't, unfortunately, I couldn't get the actual text of it, but the gist of it is that it was a collection of research done on wolves up to this point. And I think it's clear that there was an emphasis on the fact that they are endangered, and just kind of collecting that information to present it to a general audience. And it was well received. Like there are like New York Times reviews basically, saying it's a very comprehensive survey. There are multiple awards that it had won too. So this was a book that went out and was quite successful at getting information out there. All that being said, it also included the 1947 research that we went through before and all the issues that were there with that.
Okay, so it's a popular wolf book, and it's got the term alpha wolf.
Yes,
and that's how it kind of enters the I don't know, public knowledge.
Yeah, it generally seems like the way that kind of came into popular view was David Meck's book. And I think it's actually a really good thing that this book came out, because I'm not sure I can draw an exact equivalence, but 1973, the Endangered Species Act included wolves in a protected status, which was, I think, the first time they ever got recognized, despite having been almost entirely driven out of America at that point. So absolutely, get the information out there and explain the science of what's going on, and people caught on. Like, I see this as a good thing. But yes, it also included outdated information. Meanwhile, during this being made, it was David Mech who started doing more research over the years. Let's see. He started in 1986 a study on Ellesmere Island in the Northwestern Territories of Canada.
Ellesmere,
thank you. So Ellesmere Island, Northwest Territories of Canada. He had gone up there with some researchers and started studying wolf behavior in an area that is very much untouched by people.
Can confirm.
Yeah, the Canadian Isles are very, very devoid of us. So you have a situation where you can avoid the problems that existed in the 1947 study because, well, there's just nobody's been driving them out. Nobody's capturing them. They're just living as they would if we had not interacted with them. So that was a lot better, a much better way to find out.
Okay, so what differences did they see?
Kind of a few. I was reading into his comments on the alpha status. Here, I'll send you guys that. He kind of comments that like the alpha is kind of denotes a hierarchy of sorts, but in his research, he didn't find that hierarchy really existing. Instead, he saw what I mentioned earlier, smaller packs of seemingly families where there would be a mother and father raising young. And effectively, he kind of noted like you could still call like the male and female wolf, with like the oldest ones, an alpha per se, but his argument is that term doesn't add any descriptor that is accurate to this situation.
So it's not that they're more outgoing or like the toughest or that they've fought their way to get there. They're just the oldest wolves.
Yeah, basically, it's basically more like that. When Schenkel's thing, it was like, oh, whoever is the strongest comes out on top, and that probably was the case for an enclosed environment where there was competition of resources.
Oh, I see. So the fact that they kind of stay in their own little segregated packs means you would see a quote unquote alpha, but that's only because that's just the dominant, that's the parent. So naturally the child is submissive to the parent.
Yeah, that's basically how that would work. And they would still be, they're still very territorial. They would mark their territory and defend it from other wolves or other predators. So a lot of that behavior still existed, but it was in a structure that wasn't like, there was no competing for mates or anything like that. In fact, rather than there being competition for females, as they was seen in the Schenkel study, they're just express monogamous relationships. It's like they mate and kind of stay that way.
And so when is the study that you're talking about now?
This was done, I jotted down the notes, 1986 through 1998, and it was published in 1999. Okay. So that's almost 50 years, plus give or take, of a time before Schenkel's thing was released, explaining the difference in how this actually was to like when people had assumed like, the alpha structure. So almost 50 years, that's how we understand a whole species, to find out, oh, without interference, that's actually not true at all.
By then it was too late.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Because even today, people will, use the term alpha wolf and concepts of how they work. And even though it's not accurate at all, even in some ways, people try to use that to describe people. So kind of a side tangent, but you ever see the grossness of like pickup artists and their way they...
We can cut this out, but are you calling me a beta cuck?
Yeah, I'm exactly calling you a beta cuck male. This is sub 8 or whatever. There's a lot of strange ideas on how people interact in relationships and stuff, and some of those ideas and concepts are copied from the same concept of an alpha thing, but that's not true of people either. We're generally speaking more predisposed to have monogamous relationships and
partnerships,
not compete partnerships. It works too. But partnerships that don't involve, there's, I guess, some competition, but it's not like people are fighting over it, or that women go to whoever is the dominant male, as unfortunately some people will try to tell you, and quite frankly, that's messed up and doesn't understand people or wolves or anything.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, obviously, like, you're right. We don't have alphas in that typical way, but the people who are willing to subscribe to that theory also see, like, not to be crass, but they see women as a scarce resource, right?
You say that, but that is very much a term, a way their people or a way women are talked about in like incel communities and stuff like that. And it's like, just it's unfortunate to listen to. It's just upsetting.
But I guess for some of these people, they might feel that they are enclosed in a system, similar to how the captive wolves were. But their captivity is all in their mind.
Yeah, there's a lot on that. I honestly, there's a long video I watched by my YouTube channel ContraPoints. A woman talks about the incel community, and it's not it's critical, but also sympathetic in a way that I think is an interesting way to approach and kind of understand and reach out to those people to try and help them. It's an interesting thing. It might be worth linking and discussing in a whole different way, but I don't know. I see something like these studies and the way people have interpreted like species and how they interact incorrectly, and then how does that affect us?
Yeah, because I guess why would people assume that just because a wolf does something that therefore humans are also describes how humans interact?
Yeah, there's a lot of false assumptions that lead to that kind of thing, and it might not be exactly that, but when you start using the same terms for a social structure that isn't really accurate to humanity or wolves or a lot of species. I did mention that there are primates that have an alpha male structure, but I, again, haven't fully researched to find out if that's still considered accurate or not. So I would not apply the behavior of any species to another one without researching it. It's generally not a good idea.
It's big brain time.
It's very big brain. What else is really interesting about the alpha, like the structure he found, was he'd also noted those, like I said before, the dominant and submissive behaviors. Those were real. Those do exist. And he saw it in ways that, rather than competition, were more like just expressions of submitting to whoever was dominant. Like, I think a common way that's seen in the wolf behavior is like the submissive one will kind of try and lick the teeth of whoever is dominant in that structure. It's kind of gross and weird, but that is how they express that, and it's almost confusing to them if a dominant one were to not like let them do it. It's like this is just how they interact, and yeah, it's gross and weird. But
do they have a theory as to why?
Because
like I assume some behaviors have like a secondary function. I'm trying to think of an example.
So there are like absolutely behaviors that have secondary functions. Like if you ever see a dog rolling in something, that's a similar thing that wolves will do to pick up a scent and carry it back to their pack and be like, hey, smell this. Because their very keen sense of smell enables them to, trace that. So there are weird things they do. I'm not sure about the mouth licking thing entirely, what the basis of that is. It absolutely could be something sensory or some communication is sent in that way.
I mean, I would just think it's because teeth are like one of their, primary tools. So by allowing you to come near my teeth, I'm showing you, deference. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Like that makes sense. Of like, all right, you gotta put yourself in a very risky situation, and because I'm dominant, I get to decide whether or not you keep your tongue.
Here's a good quote. Similarly, in a natural wolf pack, dominance is not manifested as a pecking order and seems to have a much less significance than the result of studies that had gone before, which he's referencing Schenkel's studies along with a few others up to 1979. In a natural wolf pack, the dominance rules bear no resemblance to the pecking order that a group has. The only consistent demonstration of rank in a natural pack's animals is animals' postures during social interactions. So dominant wolves assume the classic canid stand, as he refers to it, a posture with a tail up, at least horizontally, so a little bit of communication there, Some more to the submissive ones will lower themselves or cringe. You ever see like a dog like kind of lower its head? That kind of behavior is very much in there. In fact, Darwin also seems to have had studies expressing that behavior as well.
Our old buddy Darwin.
Good old Darwin. Yep.
Chucky D.
Good old
Chucky.
the Chucky D. Oh man. Yeah. In fact, submission itself may be important as dominance in terms of promoting friendly relations or reducing social distance. So there were ways to, communicate basically who's in charge in that sort of scenario, but it wasn't at all like as significant or even resulting in like a hierarchy like previous studies had said.
Okay, interesting.
So do people still quote Schenkel at all? Is his study still cited?
I don't think so, like especially not in science. I think that basically the people refer to much later stuff, and frankly there's even more stuff after this, but this is kind of the turning point where David Mech had originally, shared the same conclusions as Schenkel, and then came around to realize, no, that's not correct. And he's often gone on the record in interviews and other places saying like, this is wrong. Like we have proof now that is not at all how they function. I haven't pulled up any of the interviews, but I've seen clips of them. I could probably find one later if anyone's curious. But so everything's kind of changed.
Yeah, well, like good on him for not like sticking to his mistakes.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think this is such an interesting study, because not only can it's not something that's stubborn and like making assumptions. It's people who are willing to admit with new data that something in the past was wrong and that they're willing to correct it based on new findings, and also just the amount of changes that allow this to happen between like even just the 70s and the late 1990s. In one of his later books where he compiled even more research, there was lots of studies involving like radio trackers and other things where they were able to study a wolf based on tracking it through tags and other things, and kind of get the behavior without directly interfering. So lots of new technology was available after 1970 that made this research possible without interference or capture or any of that stuff.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense too. Because of course they're not going to have that technology in the 40s.
Yeah. Oh, so much has changed since then. And even now, they're like, they'll still microchip various ones and kind of go out and study them. And I think I mentioned before Yellowstone, like not all of this is always the case. There's lots of interesting studies about like the Yellowstone packs and how they structure themselves differently. So there are things, lots of studies following various ones in there to see how they behave. And for the most part, it's the same, just mostly bigger communities.
Those the same kinds of wolves?
They're all gray wolves of some sort. I think the ones that they have there, like there's no hybrids or anything. There's a couple reintroductions that involve like slight wolf dog introductions, but I think those are more things that people had bred and really shouldn't have, and they just have been like saved by conservations and reintroduced.
So with the bigger packs of these new wolves, are they still all a family, or how does that work?
It's been a while. I didn't unfortunately have everything about that on hand. There was like I've seen some stuff in the past on that, so I'm kind of, admittedly, my stuff right now I'm going from memory. But for the most part, the larger packs were either multiple generations of wolves. So there would be like if they made it to like grandfather of sorts, to use human terms, they would have like multiple generations of adults stick around. Sometimes one of the common behaviors in the smaller pack scene in Canada and like Yellowstone is when the pups reach maturity, they will go out and try to find a mate or possibly a pack if the mates are in another pack. And so there would be some intermingling when lone wolves would go out and look for partners. So if the availability is they have one that's alone, they'd go for that. Sometimes they would join other packs.
Oh, okay.
I guess that was another question I had. So like, yeah, we've been talking about alpha wolves. Where does the lone wolf stereotype come from, and like how does that play with the alpha wolf?
I think I know Schenkel wrote something on it. I didn't pull it up in my stuff. But basically, later on, I might as well go back to more current stuff. Lone wolf is basically just the pups when they have reached sexual maturity. It's like, okay, time to go out and start a family of your own. So they'll go out and live in kind of on their own for a while until they find a mate who's also striking out on their own. And so from there, you get new packs. Yeah, yeah, and basically that. They're just like, okay, yep, go out, find a family.
So I wonder why there's this difference. And like if it's because the packs were reintroduced to Yellowstone, or like if like southern wolves just make larger packs inherently.
Some of it is probably geographical. Honestly, if we want to go down this, I should definitely pull up some more research because we're going further into this. But yeah, a large part of it could be geography. That's a very unique area of a wildlife park. And then there's other influences like out there. They do have to contend more with farmers or hunters, people who, even though I think there are still protections in that area for them. People will absolutely, try to defend livestock, but also there have been people who want to interfere and just hunt them down. I think a different environment definitely gave them the opportunity to do that, but there is also the fact that they were reintroduced.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Like you can't, because no one did any research before wiping out the wolves. We'll never know what the original wolves were like.
Probably, I do think that probably the islands in Canada might be the closest. We'll get to that before, at least in the Americas, before everyone kind of hunted them out. Like the range of territories that they covered in America are quite huge, and they have not been able to reclaim that even today. Like they have traced territories back a while, and a lot of them were taken by coyotes because they generally avoid humans and go for smaller prey, so they just kind of adapted into those environments.
Coyotes.
Oh, coyotes. They're silly little creatures.
But I mean, it's like you could probably hazard some educated guesses based on, not only the wolf population of today, but also just like, from fossil records. Because I mean, it wasn't all that long wrote about wolves, so you could probably check out some contemporary sources that describe these behaviors and make a match out of that.
Yeah, there's absolutely research into that. I've liked stuff from the Field Museum before in Chicago. They have some really neat research because they actually do some research there in taxidermy and stuff. They had their own. It's kind of gross, but they have a video of them like skinning a wolf and dissecting it to have a taxidermy bust to use for research purposes. And two, other things like that. And from there, you can find other things like what have they been eating in this territory and things like that. But that's a more recent example of a live one.
So, like, if you compare the gray wolf, this might be beyond what you researched, the gray wolf to like other species of wolves. I don't even know how many species there are.
That was actually going to be my question. Like, not only wolves in this part of the world, but elsewhere.
It seems like the gray wolf of America is pretty much similar to that in Europe. Like it's a cross-continental species, of Canis lupus. There are absolutely other related species that are all that are also considered wolves. Even like at some point, like certain jackals are actually considered wolf species. Canines are a really weird one with that because not only there are enough of them that are distinct enough to have different species, but oftentimes, despite normally species being defined as like these, this species of creatures can breed and continue having fertile offspring, then canines can have hybrids that are actually still bear fertile offspring for multiple generations, like coyote wolf hybrids and other things. So it gets really messy when you deal with species across different continents and stuff. But for the most part, the Canis lupus gray wolf is very much prevalent, not only in the Western world, but also further east too.
I guess that was another question I had. Like, how static are these behaviors? Like, what are the chances that they behaved in this same way, say, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that kind of thing?
Again, I'm not sure, but it sounds to me like they probably would have been doing what they normally do of, hunting the available livestock. Oh, not livestock, sorry. Available fauna usually, I guess in America, usually deer or elk, usually bigger game that packs can take down. Seems like they're mostly consistent in that when not interfered with, but almost throughout, but not only through the US, but also plenty of Europe where they have been interfered and driven out. In fact, most of them are not in Europe anymore. There are a couple, I think, species of smaller ones like the European wolf, but gray wolves are pretty much gone from there. You'll see them more in Russia and Asia in terms of the old country, I guess.
I feel bad for the poor wolves. They've gotten a bad run of things.
They kind of have, and a lot of it comes down to, well, partially our impressions of them, because like various different cultures have different opinions on them. Some revere them, some see them as like evil or threats, and in a lot of, I think, European culture, they were seen as, well, there's a lot of stigmas against them. They were seen as evil or problematic, and or, to use a more common term. But at the same time, it also, there's practical things of, yeah, they would hunt livestock, and that caused an issue for humans who are trying to raise livestock for themselves.
Well, I mean, as soon as we turn them into dogs, like what did we need the wolf for,
That is true. We did way early in history decide to give them, meat that tasted better than the other meat, and they had to work for it less. So it was like, hey, yeah. Just stick to these humans. But they absolutely play an important part in any ecosystem. One of the reasons we have such a problem with white-tailed deer is absolutely the lack of predators that can take them down. I don't know how bad that is in like the Pacific Northwest or in Canada, but deer are just like all over the place here.
We've got a lot of deer. I don't know if they're white-tailed deer specifically, but we got a bunch.
Yeah, they'll go after white-tailed deer or elks or whatever type of, I guess, cervines are usually available in their region. But out here we have frequent deer seasons in Virginia, and that's all good and well. And frankly, I think it needs to happen because their populations will absolutely get overrun if there's nothing to hunt them. And I think that kind of is just something that happens. Like if you take out a natural predator for a species, you take on the responsibility of the part of the environment that is now affected by the lack of that species. So we have hunting, and I think that kind of is what we have as a result of the what we've done to drive them out.
Yeah, so like modern hunting, how we hunt deer, we probably wouldn't hunt wolves, right?
Not here. There are none, unfortunately. I think out in my area there are some hybrid species that exist, but even those are going to extinction. Or they're the northern coyote wolf hybrids that are just becoming more and more popular, shall I say, more common in the east. But there absolutely are people who try to hunt wolves. Like I mentioned in Alaska, the people trying to hunt them with helicopters, or Yellowstone, where there's competition between them and livestock. I don't know what it's like in Canada. There seem to be a lot of people who just have just really want to take them out. I'm trying to find an appropriate way to say it.
I don't know. Like I mean, I'm living in a more rural part of the country comparative to where I grew up. Like there is a bit of a hunting culture. I think it depends like where you go, who you talk to. I mean, in the cities, just inherently people are not as interested in hunting because you just what are you going to hunt, like a raccoon?
It's not part of the culture. It's like what's the value? And I guess you could hunt a raccoon, or my favorite, squirrel catapult might be a little more better for an urban environment. But so I guess the popularity of hunting will depend very much on the area we're in. I'm in a more rural area, and every time I go down the street, I'll see people with deer cages because hey, it's deer season. Gotta package them up somewhere.
Yeah, like I get the people who are into that. That's not for me.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel kind of neutral on it. I know lots of people will be like get upset over the way they handle different species, or wish that people wouldn't kill animals, and I get it. But like I said before, we killed the predator. We now replace them to take care of overpopulation, and I think that's just the result of that behavior that happened so long ago, is we still have to deal with overpopulation of what was prey.
Yeah, like it makes sense. Like it's almost more ethical to hunt than it is to, eat factory farmed meat. Like that's poor cows. They just spend their whole day in a little box.
Oh man, there's a lot of ethical issues with meat, and I'll never be one to say like go vegan or like I will never shame anyone for eating meat. Heck, I love meat. I'll eat it myself. But yeah, it's the way we've done mass production. I wonder how perceptions of that will change in the future. Like, pigs, arguably, they're smarter than dogs, and they're penned up in tiny little cages, and it's unfortunate. So how does that compare to hunting? Your chances are getting meat to use is less, but hey, if you get a good deer, you can last you quite a while. I've had some deer sausage. That was really good.
Well, yeah, and like even from an environmental standpoint of you're not specifically growing crops to feed the deer feed themselves. They take care of that for you.
Oh, they'll take care of some kudzu or some shrubbery or whatever you got.
But like it's not like you don't have to worry about the deer. The deer look after themselves. So you're not wasting more resources on making food for the deer to then kill the deer and then eat the deer. So like 2 levels of food. Like I think in Australia it's very similar. Of the most environmentally friendly, ecological, ethical food you can eat is kangaroo, which occupy a very similar niche to the deer that we've got in North America.
Very, very tasty. I like kangaroo.
Kangaroo doesn't sound too bad, but I like to think that they hunt them with boxing gloves and just punch them out. It's that dukes up. Oh man.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like every time there's a mass shooting, you can't exactly blame factory farms. So point to the meat industry. I'm just saying.
There's a whole extra subject in that. There was also a ton of research done into dominance between breeding male and female. It seems like the general impression he got was, practical implications of partial significance were not apparent. Behavior does not seem to always constitute like food begging, he discovered as part of the behavior. But yeah, it seems like even previously there have been thoughts of like, the alpha is always male and always and the female was submissive to that. Doesn't seem to be true in their more natural environment either. It was like, just a mother and father kind of.
So they co-parent.
Yeah, very much co-parenting kind of situation.
Oh, interesting. Because I've heard, well, I don't know if you know about this, but like with hyenas, it's usually a dominant female.
Yeah, they're weird. Hyenas, well, there's also some weird biological things with that. Like the hyenas have very high testosterone, which seems to let's be real, it does affect the biology and brain, and they will.
Me too.
Yeah. You could kind of, they're very aggressive females in hyenas.
But so when you say that the females are dominant, that means they do like do they also do the hunting and the caretaking? Because I'm just thinking lions. Like obviously the male is dominant, but the female does a lot of the legwork.
I'm not sure. I've never actually looked too much into hyena behavior.
Lions as well. I think that's pretty comparable to the whole alpha wolf thing of like you talk about the king of the jungle. You assume that lions don't even live in the jungle.
It's such a wrong term in so many ways.
Interesting.
But like to assume that like the male lion is the king and he does all the work. It's really not the case.
No, they just. There are absolutely cases of lions. Lions are actually a really kind of a different thing too. Like they'll often hunt, but they'll hunt in like same-sex groups. Oftentimes, like males will hunt together, females will hunt together. So their interactions are quite different. But yeah, it's females put in a lot more work to hunt for a pride.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look into all that and kind of understand. One, not to. I spoke a lot about like referencing how society, like in terms of how they structure, is more similar to human families. It's still not entirely accurate to treat them like, oh, they're more like us than we thought, because you can put your own interpretations on that and still make wrong assumptions.
Well, yeah, because like even human families, they've got different dynamics of I mean, sometimes you've got more than just mom and dad living at home. You've got grandparents, aunts and uncles. Of all those adults, different ones might be more dominant in the family structure.
Yeah, even that's in human society has changed a lot recently. Like, it's not that long ago when like most the average family would have like the grandma and grandpa still around, and or children like getting married and kind of taking care of their father or mother. And I guess more recently, it was more common for what am I trying to say? For kids when they reach adulthood to go out and live on their own independently, which is fine. It's just like even in our culture, it's like our social structure changes a lot depending on environment or influences and other things,
or availability of resources. Like, a lot of people just can't afford to leave home.
Yeah, that's becoming more common again too. Like, for a while we were used to like, being able to independently like own a house with just like you and like your spouse, and now that's becoming no longer a thing for a lot of people.
We're just a bunch of wolves in a
I was
fenced
gonna
in
say,
forest.
we're all just animals. People are the real animal.
What if we were just animals all along? Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to see that and kind of learn how they would not to make assumptions on like the wrong pretenses. Like, if you're going to study a species, doing it in an environment that is very skewed due to outside influences, it's not ideal. And now there's a lot better technology to understand species in their natural habitat that make things so much easier, and you can get way more accurate results than things had seen before. So it's good to kind of get the concept out of there. And when cultural things come out, like you would just assume, like, an alpha wolf is how things function. It's good to kind of see how that changes over time, and see how our assumptions might keep up.
I mean, what I'm hearing is just be the first to talk about something, and that way you can control the narrative no matter what. Because we're still using the term alpha wolf.
In general, that happens a lot. Like Sigmund Freud, he's like the most famous psychologist. He's the worst, though. Like, none of his theories panned out at all, but it got
oh my gosh.
It gets people talking. It gets people thinking about, oh, well, gee, I wonder why my brain does what it does, or why do I think the thoughts that I think. Like, his theories for all that have not stood the test of time, but it got people looking into, okay, well, why is it like this? In anthropology, very much the same. Of I don't know if this is a name that tracks, but Margaret Mead is a hugely famous anthropologist. Is that a name that sounds familiar?
I only know it because there's was an elementary school near me named Margaret Mead.
Probably named after her.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, very influential early anthropologist. But if you look back on her work, it just doesn't stand the test of time.
You're talking about Freud, like, not only were his things later be proven wrong, but we still invoke those wrong things, like Freudian slip or everything is sex. Like, we still quote these things even though they're very obliquely wrong, not just his name but his theories too.
Yeah, and even not what is it? Psychoanalysis was his field, I guess. Yeah, there is still a form of psychoanalysis exists today that I think very much doesn't directly reference Freud, but it's still a lot of things in the same vein. It still exists, despite it being awfully disproven.
Well, that's the hard part. Well, just in general, of once the wrong answer is out there, it's so hard to get rid of it. Like the factoid that you eat 8 spiders a year in your sleep.
Is it 8 or 10?
I don't know, but like, that was invented to show how quickly misinformation can spread.
Yeah, I've heard people unironically say that. It's like, do you eat 3 spiders a year? I'm like, no, that's fake.
But like, it was specifically designed to be fake, to show people that you will believe anything.
There's a version of that I really like, that kind of like jokingly like compounds on the fakeness of it. That says like, what's it? That the factoid that people eat like 3 spiders a year is inaccurate. Spiders George, who lives in a cave and eats 3,000 spiders a year, was an outlier and should not be counted. I've seen it joke before. I love it, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of how this goes. All that is just bogus.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's an average amongst the entire human population. There's one really weird guy out there.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, like, absolutely, I think that all the things we referenced on Wolf Society all built up to getting to the right answer. It's just that a lot of assumptions were made that were wrong on the way, and thankfully, in terms of science, we've overcome them. I just wonder if people will see it more in culture and kind of reference it better. I think most of the people do.
Like I think eventually it gets there, and it also depends on like who you talk to. Like it's one of those things that like I mean, anytime anyone brings up Napoleon, they're like, "Hey, did you know he wasn't actually short? He was average height for his time." Like to the point where it's not even an interesting factoid.
Yeah, I think this has reached that point of like, yeah, people know it's not true. In some ways, I think people keep the term, but they kind of want to rebrand it. It's the Wolf Conservation Center of New York has like some like their own. They have like campaigns and stuff to try and educate people. They'll still use the term like alpha wolf, but they'll use it in the way referencing like more recent studies and show like, oh well, yeah, there's like an alpha male and female kind of together, and it's not really a dominance or competition thing, but we'll still use the term because it's kind of how it's recognized.
Well, yeah, and I think in general, when like going back to talking about the pickup artists and people who want to be the alpha male, like they don't call themselves the alpha wolf; they call themselves the alpha male.
Yeah, the alpha male is not a. There's nothing. I'm not really a sociology person, but there's nothing saying that that's really how people function in society. And sure, I'm sure some people want to treat it that way, but when you treat people in like, especially in like relationships, as like competition, it gets really scummy.
I think that's also part of it. Like the broadly speaking, the concept of an alpha male, not limited to species, does exist. There are species where alphas, do go to the top of the hierarchy, but that's the point of pickup artists, right? They're trying to demean people, specifically usually women, to this lower level by using that kind of language.
Yeah, and I think they try to make their appeal to men who feel downtrodden or like they just can't catch a break. And it certainly seems convenient when you can blame the world because you're not the dominant one, and therefore it's everyone else's problem that you can't get a date, when probably it's your personality. And the fact that you're saying this stuff makes you kind of a dirtbag.
Very true.
I'll just say it. I'll say it right there. So yeah, it's because of stuff like that. I think it's important to people to be like, hey, maybe don't look at yourselves that way, when even, studies that seem to imply that in other species that are not humans even turn out to not be accurate. So don't structure yourself in that way.
No, I like the what was I can't remember the center you mentioned, JJ, that was trying to like reclaim the term alpha.
Yeah, the Wolf Conservation Center, a New York group. They kind of have like their own marketing. You can even like they have shirts of like for families like alpha wolf, like male cut with female cut, and like one for the kids like wolf pup or whatever. It's like, yeah, they still use it because people use it, but they want to educate people that this is how it actually works. It's more. Yeah. It's not a competitive environment. It's more of a social family working together, and like, yeah, that's cool. So they still use the word, but it helps people understand better how it actually works.
Lean into and use it as a teaching tool. I think that's cool.
Yeah. I like that approach.
Cool. Got any other wolfy facts for us?
Yeah, I've said everything I wanted to. I think they're pretty cool.
Cool.
Good way to learn about them, learn about how we study and how we can use technology and research to do better over the years. I hope this was an informative and hopefully reliable enough conversation from a non-expert. This has been JJ.
And David.
And Aiden.
Thank you and good night. Ow!
Oh!
Aruga.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to stay up to date on the show, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also have a Patreon if you wanted to contribute to the show. That just allows us to make it a higher quality. We'd appreciate you leaving us a review wherever you're listening to this. That will help other people listen to the show, and it's going to let us grow our audience. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.